Display, which is a way of bringing together the two titles of the two new books that we will discuss today, where one is entitled On Display, Instagram, the Self and the City, and the other one is entitled The Hipster Economy, Taste and Authenticity in Late Modern Capitalism. So then one might think then, okay, why are these books interesting to discuss jointly? And obviously, first, both books deal with the city, and both books also deal with questions of taste and display, or more broadly, the cultural economy of cities. But they do it in different ways. So with the first book, On Display, it concerns especially the self and how individuals represent or stage themselves and the city through social media, especially Instagram. While in the second case, it concerns how various types of practices and products are put on display, not through media foremost, but rather in real life, and even through the absence of mediation, for example, in bars, shops, marketplaces, and so on. So we think that together these books capture an interesting tension between, on the one hand, the digital circulation of urban imageries, and on the other hand, the material display of tasteful goods, especially related to neocraft in this so-called hipster economy. So they depict what we might call even a post-digital city. The post-digital is a term or concept that some of us here are working with at least, which is at the intersection of taken for granted digital circulation and more authentic or even exclusive forms of urban culture. So we think that these similarities and differences will open up for an interesting conversation here. And obviously, it's also clear that both books relate to the general field of geomedia studies, which we work with here in our center, where we are both human geographers and media scholars working together. So it has to do with a continuous interplay between media and communication and the production of place and space, and also what consequences this has for social divisions, cultural distinctions, and different forms of power geometries, which is very important also in the research we conduct here. So we look forward to have a joint discussion at the end about both these books. Before we get there, I will say also a few words about the presenters. Maybe you already know them, but I will say just a few words. So John Boy first is assistant professor of sociology at Leiden University in the Netherlands, where he is affiliated with the Institute of Cultural Anthropology and Development Sociology. And this academic year, he's also a fellow at the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Study in the Humanities and Social Sciences. John's research investigates the interface between digital technologies and social life. Especially his research is about social media platforms in the context of urban life and the practices of those who imagine, build, and maintain alternative digital infrastructures. And there are two quite recent articles I'd like to mention in this context, and both are also co-authored with Justus. Reassembling the City through Instagram from Transactions of the Institute of British Geographers, and Lifestyle Enclaves in the Instagram City from Social Media plus Society. And these are articles that are also related to the book On Display very much, I think. And this also brings me to our second presenter, the same book, Justus Uitermark, who is a professor of urban geography at the University of Amsterdam, where he also serves as academic director of the Amsterdam Institute for Social Science Research. And in his research, Justus brings together different themes and epistemologies, including reflexive computational, social science, cities and social movements, and urban policy and spatial inequality. And Justus is the author of several books, including Dynamics of Power in Dutch Integration Politics from 2012, and Cities and Social Movements from 2017. And there's also a new forthcoming book I read about, together with Petter Törnberg, which is entitled Seeing Like a Platform. So I'm really looking forward to that forthcoming book. And I know that Justus has also authored several articles together with Petter Törnberg. For example, one is entitled Tweeting Ourselves to Death, The Cultural Logic of Digital Capitalism. It's a very good title, I think. And also Urban Mediatization and Planetary Gentrification, The Rise and Fall of a favela across media platforms. And then our final presenter today, Alessandro Gerosa, is an assistant professor in cultural sociology at the University of Milan. His research looks at how people seek authentic and meaningful lives in late modern capitalism, and his main work deals with the resurgence of artisanal forms of production and consumption. This is what takes us then to the hipster economy. He's also doing research on digital cultures, though, and his interests, these different interests are represented in, for example, these two titles from articles: Cosmopolitans of Regionalism, Dealers and Omnivores' Taste Under Italian Food Truck Economic Imaginary, from Consumption Markets and Culture in 2021, and then another article called Subjectivity and Algorithmic Imaginaries, the Algorithmic Other, from the journal Subjectivity last year, 2023. So these two kind of bring together the two sides, I think, of your research interests, Alessandro. So with this brief introduction, I'm very happy to give the word back to you, Connie, and you will moderate the rest of the discussion and so on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I have nothing to add for yet. We just start with the presentations, please. Go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you, Andre, very much for this introduction and for the invitation to speak here today and to present our book. Let me do the thing. All right. I think that is working. Okay. Yes. So the work that we're here to present today is our book that came out in January of this year called On Display: Instagram, the Self, and the City, which Andre already mentioned. This is really the result of Justus and I having worked together since 2015. So 9 years of labor leading up to this. Yeah, so the idea for today's talk is to give a brief introduction to this book, really to prepare a discussion then also with Alessandro and the wider Geomedia Center community here. So, like I mentioned, this book is the result of a longer-term collaboration. Andre mentioned several papers that we've produced over the years, which some of which were fed into this book also. And our collaboration really started with quite a broad research question about how Instagram gets woven into everyday relationships and how that has various kinds of repercussions for people's sense of self, for the social relations that they form, and for how they relate to their urban environment around them. And over the course of working together, we gradually developed a kind of situated approach to this question, inspired, among others, by Nick Holdry's idea about a non-media-centric media studies, but also drawing on relational sociology in particular, as I'll mention. Our book is also based on mixed methods research. Initially, it was computationally driven, as I'll mention, as I'll go into a little bit of detail in a minute. And by computational, I mean especially that we use network analysis and geographic analysis on the basis of to analyze platform data that we were able to collect in the early phases of the book, of working on this book. And then over time, our emphasis shifted more and more towards qualitative methods, which were incredibly important to be able to round out the picture, to connect the digital representations and the findings from the platform data to what was going on the ground. And I'll reflect on that a little bit as well. Yeah, to kind of get us started today, I thought I would provide an introduction to the book, first by speaking a little bit about the theoretical framework and some of the main arguments that we develop in the book, and then to zoom in on these two different aspects that are mentioned in the subtitle of the book, so Instagram and the self. I want to go into a little bit of one of the chapters of the book to talk about the kind of argument that we developed there, and then Instagram and the city, which is maybe the more immediately relevant to the Geomedia Center crowd here. I'd like to go into a little bit more into one of the chapters, and again, the kind of arguments that we make. Okay, so starting out with our perspective and our theoretical framework. So when we began this work, I think Justus said recently, we didn't expect that we would write a pink book. We thought we would maybe write a gray book or a blue book, a book that looks really serious, a book that would be about protests and social movements and all the kinds of things that were on people's minds, coming out of 2012 and then still well into 2014, 2015 when we started working together. With Gezi Park protests and Arab Spring and all these discussions, and on our desks in the beginning were books by Manuel Castells, and that's how we were thinking about Instagram to begin with. The other body of literature that we were looking at was from computational social science, where, as you may be aware, there's a big emphasis on studying polarization, especially in the political process, especially in the US political process. So this is a visualization from a classic analysis of the blogosphere during the 2004 elections, I believe, which shows a very clear polarization between blogs that lean Democrat, blogs that lean Republican, and very few in between. When we first started approaching Instagram, we thought we would be looking for similar patterns. We'd be looking for conflict. We'd be looking for contention. We'd be looking for people complaining and getting in fights and so on and so forth. So our initial approach was to once we've been gathering this network data for a while, this platform data for a while, was to look at networks forming on the platform, and we didn't see a picture like this one here. Instead, we saw something that looked a little bit more like this. Lots of different groups. Yes, we were able to discern different kinds of groups, but there were lots of different ones, and they weren't nearly as clearly separated as we thought they would be. Still, in the beginning, that was very much the story that we were telling, was about how Instagram is a device for different kinds of groups to find themselves, to kind of engage in their own separate bubbles. Yeah, like I said, we also took a geographic approach, and we started mapping the platform data that we had at different kinds of scales, neighborhood scales, and the city as a whole. And one thing that we very quickly noticed is that the Instagram activity was concentrated around certain kinds of places, certain kinds of hotspots, if you will. And those hotspots had nothing to do with what we were expecting, protests, contention, these kinds of things, but rather it was what City Lab called the Instagram playground. So the I Amsterdam sculpture, which is now no longer on the Museumplein, was one of those hotspots, and it became kind of a synonym worldwide for this kind of a Instagram playground in cities. So that was puzzling for us at first, given the perspective we were coming from, why these kinds of places were attracting so much of the attention. The other thing that was puzzling was what people were portraying. Very much, we were able to reproduce what Litmanovich described around that time also as Instagramism, right? This overwhelming aesthetic of how people portray the city around them, or their belongings, or their everyday routines in through a certain kind of aesthetic. That really didn't fit the narrative we came to these things with initially. So we gradually started wanted to look at things differently, and to come up with some different tools for interpreting what was going on. The other thing that our network analysis yielded was insights into the vast inequality on the platform in terms of the attention that users are able to get. Very few users are able to get a lot of attention. That's the people on the far end of this tail here, whereas most people just get a kind of middling amount of attention. And one of the things we started doing quite early on in the process also was to reach out to those people that were getting a lot of attention and to interview them. And initially we thought we would be speaking to influencers, but in fact, the people that were commanding a lot of attention on the urban scale were not necessarily influencers. They were people that, for various kinds of different reasons, were able to command a lot of attention, often because they were at the intersection between different kinds of social scenes within the city. Those social scenes included especially creatives, people that were very much professionally and by their disposition into creating images. So, makes sense in a way, but again, definitely not reflecting the kind of contentious politics process that we had initially looked for. So one of the big switches that we at some point found ourselves making was essentially going from looking at Instagram as a kind of a public sphere setting where people are hashing things out with each other, where they're engaged in debate or opinion exchange, and instead seeing it more like an absolutist court, where the status hierarchy is really the thing that that structures all interaction, where getting closer to the source of status is what people's strategies and practices are all about, and where all kinds of practices are determined by wanting to rise in the status order, fashions and routines and so on, wearing outlandish clothes, as was the case in the absolutist court. And our theory also shifted around this time that we drew on. So our big theoretical sources are shown here. On the left, that's Norbert Elias, whose analysis not just of the absolutist court or of the court society, but also of the civilizing process more generally was inspiring to us. So the idea of looking at social relations in this way became quite central. The other important concept is the idea of thinking of Instagram as a field, as inspired by Bourdieu, a field with its own rewards that people strive after as they come under its illugio, as they orient themselves towards the kinds of rewards that they can hope to earn within this field. And then finally, Alice Marwick's book on social media and status became important as we started seeing the influence, which she stresses, of neoliberal society on structuring also these kinds of practices. The three main arguments then that we try to develop is, first of all, to look at Instagram as a site of social integration rather than separation, rather than pulling people apart into different bubbles, of seeing Instagram as thriving on inequality, especially these vast status inequalities, and as Instagram as a site that engenders conformity and the staging of minute deviations within this regime that kind of imposes this conformity. So how do we develop that argument? So let me now zoom in a little bit on the two different parts of the book. So first of all, Instagram and the self. Here we have two different chapters looking at two different groups. The first is on what we call kind of intensive users of the platform, not necessarily people that make their living there, but people that are invested in one way or another, from all kinds of different backgrounds. And the second are Instagram feminists. And that's the one I'd like to zoom into a little bit. So both of these chapters are, again, like a lot of the book, Amsterdam focused. So again, our situated approach in action here. So let me zoom in a little bit on our research with Instagram feminists. This is work that's this is based on joint work with Laura Savolainen from the University of Helsinki at this point. Excuse me. It's based on 25 interviews with self-affiliated Instagram users that self-affiliate with feminism in one way or another. And they're not necessarily the most high-profile activists who are running campaigns. We wanted to kind of get a sense of the mundane experience of having a feminist identity on Instagram. They come from diverse backgrounds, the interviewees, but most have a high level of education. Excuse me, I need to rearrange my screen here real quick. So one of the interviewees told us the following. She said, about a year ago, I was having a conversation with another model, and she was like, it's really important to show on your Instagram who you are as a person. If you want to get booked to bigger jobs, they also want you because you are a certain person, because you love a certain thing. That was when I decided that feminism is a big part of me, so it should be a big part of my social media. It has been a success so far. My bookers like the image I put on my Instagram. So this is in a way, matches what a lot of the stereotypes about social media users are. Right, they're in it to promote themselves. They're putting on an elaborate show to appeal to others. But the thing that we learned through in-depth interviews is that there's really a lot more to it. Namely, that there's a lot of internal struggles as people deal with these kind of overwhelming tensions that result from, on the one hand, putting themselves on display for others to see, and on the other hand, trying to stay true to what they see their true personality is. And Instagram users who identify as feminists deal with this in very specific ways. One way in which it's easy to put a feminist identity on display is by leaning into the kind of feminism that says it's inherently feminist to show one's successes as a woman. The kind of liberal feminist idea of empowerment, popular feminism, as Janet Weiser puts it. So that this is an example from one of the research participants of the kind of image that she associates with that. But the source of struggle, like I said, it's also a source of struggle. So Instagram is so visual, Erica told us. You have to show yourself all the time, and it makes for a feminism or an activism that is so centered on your own body and not your thoughts always. I do think it's difficult because I think that what I want to say really fits badly with the platform. So on the one hand, if you want to have a feminist identity, being on the platform is almost inescapable. But on the other hand, it means having to kind of play by the rules of the platform, and that is often a big source of strains. Excuse me. And then another insight from this interviewee. So people like it when you achieve something. Instagram is very much about individual achievements and competition in a way that is difficult to combine with feminism. I try to counter that, but I also see that it goes against the way the medium is created. I always get the most response and engagement on pictures of myself. And then I also realized that sometimes to get a political message across, I have to be in the image myself. So I struggle with Instagram as a platform a lot. And one thing that's easy to miss on these 3 images that are shown here from our research participant is that in each of these images, she does appear in the picture, like she says one has to, but she decenters herself slightly, and she tries to use her presence in the images to also show something else. So whether it's books or ideas, whether it's a friend, whether it's a group that she's a part of, this is the kind of minute deviation that she's working with in order to, on the one hand, play by the rules of Instagram, but on the other hand, also push beyond them a little bit and make sure that something like a politics can live here. So aside from these subjective tensions, which we go into a lot in the book, we also talk about the city more widely, its built environment, its ecology, and so on, and how that is shaped by Instagram. And again, here we have 2 different chapters that deal with this. One of them, which I'll go into a little bit now, is integration and conformity, which looks at different subcultures and how they're integrated into Amsterdam, integrated into the wider environment through Instagram. And the other one, called staging status, is a study of how Instagram shapes urban change on a single street. And this is based on joint work with Irene Bronsford. So to zoom in, like I said, on the first of these 2, this is a chapter where our computational analysis plays a quite central role. So to say a little bit about that, the platform data that we analyze here was collected between December 2015 and May 2016, so quite a while ago at this point. And one reason for that is simply that you can't collect data like this anymore, thanks to multiple changes that have happened to the platform in the meantime, not only in response to Cambridge Analytica, but that was a big reason. We selected the posts by users that are local to Amsterdam, resulting in about 700,000 by not quite 80,000 users. And we also collected the interactions on these posts, which numbered in the millions, so the likes and the comments that people left. And if we look at users that like or comment on each other's posts, then we see that there are 130,000 mutual ties among these users within the city. And this serves as the basis for network analysis. And the network analysis we can use we can apply something called community detection to look at different clusters of users, and then we manually characterize those different clusters. So on the one hand, the story that I started out with, right, the idea that Instagram is providing a device for different kinds of communities to find each other and to live kind of separate lives from each other, is reflected in this. So the modularity measure that our network analysis yields suggests that there is a high degree of separation, a relatively high degree of separation between different communities. We identify more than 30 different clusters, and here we list the top 9 of those, and we're able to characterize those as having distinct profiles and also see them as embedded in different kinds of lifestyle zones within the city. So some of these lifestyle zones include a nightlife zone, a lifestyle zone, for instance, centered around popular brunch spots, a culture zone centered around the major museums within the city, and a fitness zone that's centered around gyms and other kinds of establishments that focus on body and fitness and wellness. But the same analysis can also allow us to tell a different story, namely one of integration. So even these different clusters that have different profiles, they actually overlap a lot in the city. They all co-occur within the same places. They all have a very similar spatial footprint within the city, and in fact, social ties very often also span across these different clusters of users rather than just occurring within different clusters. So what we learn from that is that yes, there to a certain extent bubbles are able to form as a result of people engaging with each other through social media. But Instagram is also serving as a vehicle for integration, and that's important because it means that people are brought within the purview of distant others and have to take into account, their gaze and how they appeal to these distant communities. The result of this is a pressure to conform, which we also see in the qualitative research that we've conducted. And for the city, one important finding in this context is that Instagram visibility is very much a double-edged thing, and that it especially hurts deviant subcultures. So, for instance, for some establishments in the city, Instagram visibility is an unqualified good, right? There's certain places that use this as their sole marketing channel. They're able to be very successful by having high levels of visibility on Instagram. That includes cafes, nightclubs, especially, that are able to attract audiences in that way. There are other places for which Instagram visibility is more often a source of strains, either because the kind of visibility that they get is selective and only highlights certain parts that they're showing off. So, for instance, in the Eye Film Museum, they get a lot. They do quite well on Instagram when it comes to their architecture or to aspects of their collection that have more to do with popular film. But when it comes to their core mission, which is to be also a repository for Dutch filmmaking in particular, there they don't do so well. And some people within the organization would like them to do more to promote their main mission on their Instagram channel. In the course of gyms, they often do very well on Instagram. They get a lot of visibility there. But that can also be a source of strain, because if your gym is associated with only normatively beautiful people who are extremely good at sports, then that leads to a kind of feeling of social exclusion for those who don't live up to that norm. And then for example, a queer safe space within the city, Instagram visibility is clearly a danger. And in fact, they do not allow Instagram to be used within their spaces. Excuse me. So with this, I thought I would wrap it up and turn it over to Alessandro, having given a little bit of a flavor of what the book is about, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the book presentation. Wow, now the pressure is on me to keep it up But okay, so let me do also the very thing in which I try to display my screen, demonstrating I'm a true digital sociologist. Okay, do you confirm you can see me? Okay, thank you. So thank you very much. Again, wonderful, wonderful event. Thank you so much for the invitation today. Again, I titled my presentation "Authenticity and Hipsterism Beyond Social Media," not to bring a contrast, to the previous book, but actually to connect with it. I could have used probably a post-digital, analysis of authenticity and hipsterism, but I didn't want it to seem to appropriate the concept. And actually, absolutely wonderful concept and strain of work you're developing. Please publish more on the post-digital so I can cite it and use it more in my research, because I think it's really, really extremely valuable. I mean, as a as a starting point, I actually wanted to use this because this has just come out a couple of days ago, and it seemed to me an incredibly lucky coincidence. This is actually in Italian, is an article in Italian. This is the automatic translation by Google. But a couple of days ago, it has been published on a national online newspaper, which is L'Inchiesta, a very important online newspaper in Italy, an article which precisely puts together my book and the on display book, and has interviews and excerpts from me and from John. So I think a very beautiful testament to the fact that there exists a very nice and strict connection between those teams, and I found it a very nice coincidence that it came out just a couple of days before this online seminar. So obviously the article is only in Italian, but I think that with the automatic translation, you can pretty much also get the meaning of it if you try to look at it. And I think it's a very nice article which very well connects our two books together. So I wanted to take this opportunity to also celebrate this joint accomplishment. So 2 joint accomplishments in a few days. I don't know what else we can achieve in the future, but please let's explore that because it seems very fruitful as a pathway. But coming to my book, okay, obviously, we have a very, very tight link, between authenticity and social media and the digital space. We know that, on display, we just heard about it. Also, many books are being published on, the role and the quest for authenticity in social media, in video games. The fourth book I'm displaying here is actually a self-published book by by Canons, the online conspiracy, the digital conspiracy. So even online conspirationists, I don't know, sorry if I'm making up the word, look for achieving authenticity through the social media. Still, one of the goals of my book is to argue that obviously the idea of authenticity is deeply linked with the idea of the digital, but it comes also from much earlier. And so the interconnection with the digital space is one phase of a longer process. And that's why the title Beyond Social Media. Obviously, here there are 4 books that express this way better than I could ever do, and expressed how authenticity has become a paradigm in urban planning, Sharon Zukin, how the idea of guaranteeing an authentic experience to employees, a playful, authentic workplace has become a target goal in the workplace. For managers, how the new spirit of capitalism has incorporated authenticity, how marketing from the 70s onwards has based itself on authenticity. And I put my book willingly smaller than the others because I don't want to compare myself to these masterpieces, but this is the context in which also my book wishes to contribute some way, okay, to contribute to a long-term explanation and understanding of authenticity and of why we are witnessing today, indeed, this ubiquitous resurgence of craft, production, and consumption in a novel form, from here the idea of neocraft. So a disclaimer, talking of, I know the fault is on me. I titled the book The Hipster Economy. Why? Because it's very catchy, it's pop, it worked, so I'm happy about it. Still, there's a very, there is an easy ambiguity here. No, this is not a book on hipsters as a stereotypical kind of figure. Actually, I argue in the book that if hipsters as a subculture actually existed beyond being a stereotype, that hipsters were much more a stereotype, if we want, than a real subculture. And if they were a subculture, they were not so relevant sociologically speaking, no? But actually, this is a book about hipsterism as an attitude or a disposition of consumption. Here I'm going high. I'm taking the chance to also celebrate Marc Bloch, which, the famous French historian who's being, transferred now in the Pantheon. And Marc Bloch wrote in The Royal Touch, is there perhaps for a long disputed belief a more beautiful sign of victory than going down to the rank of banality? Here he was discussing against the royal touch of the middle-aged kings. But this book indeed is how it has come, how we arrived to the point where hipsterism has become some way a banal feature of our everyday life, especially in our explorations of the urban economy, our exploration of the contemporary city. One of the things I was more worried about in my book was obviously to be actually, exaggerating. And one of the reasons why I've been pretty much happy is that, well, when the book came out, and I also had what Andy Warhol would have termed my 5 minutes of fame, thanks to the fact that it went quite viral on Twitter, I had researchers from all over the world, from Mexico City, from Mumbai, from Southern America, writing me, well, that we literally have neighborhoods as the one you describe in your book also, in our city. There also this kind of shops, this kind of places are, multiplying also, in our cities. And that was pretty much reassuring because, okay, it confirmed me. It was not just, all in my head. I was not just, vastly exaggerating something. But also, I mean, another very interesting thing, like during one of my first presentations, there was this professor, now I can't remember the affiliation and I'm really sorry, but he was telling me that basically in around 2008, some years before the pandemic, he used his students who were on Erasmus to do some, urban ethnography, making them going around and, analyzing, looking at which kind of shops were more adhering to a kind of hipster, authentic kind of aesthetic. And a very nice research came from it, even a book, etc., an edited book. And when he tried to do this research again after the pandemic, couple of years after the pandemic, actually, he realized that it wasn't possible because this aesthetic had become so much ubiquitous that it wasn't really possible anymore to clearly, distinguish these kind of businesses from the others in neighborhoods, of middle-sized and large-sized cities. And this was also quite okay. I said, okay, so maybe what I'm saying makes some sense. And the idea is, again, this, how the hipsterism has become so ubiquitous and an aesthetic based on being authentic and being alternative to the mainstream, being distinctive against, again, in the book presentation we just heard, John was speaking about, an aesthetic conformity, which is, however, composed of minute deviations, which is exactly what's going on here in a journal, not in the book, but in a journal article that another colleague at the University of Milan, Alessandro Gandini, and me published on a Neocraft work. We speak specifically of marginal distinction, to show how, you have to adhere to the same aesthetic, but at the same time be marginally distinct in order to reassess your uniqueness, your difference from anyone else. And so the idea, the goal of this book is to gain 3 levels of historical depth. I will go through them pretty quickly, don't worry. The first one is the longue durée. And again, it's about how actually, if we adopt a longue durée approach, and here the reference is to this guy with his very flamboyant and beautiful jacket, who's Fernand Braudel, another French historian. Now, the aspiration to authenticity can be understood and contextualized as a reaction to the development of the industrial and capitalist society. Here the reference is to Raymond Williams. As you may well know, Raymond Williams, the cultural critic, argued that obviously culture is as old as human beings, but the concept of culture, the idea, culture as a concept emerged between the 17th and the 18th century as a reaction to the process of industrialization and capitalism. Something similar can be said about the ideal of, being authentic vis-a-vis the mounting constraining forces of society. On a medium-term level, we can see authenticity as an aesthetic regime that has deeply interlocked itself in a context in the post-Fordist capitalism, so in a specific capitalist configuration. And again, this is why we can see the centrality of authenticity in many different realms, in the workplace, but also in the city and so on. It has become functional and fundamental for a certain kind of capital accumulation that has become paradigmatic in the last 50 years or so. And then in the more short term, if we look at the last 10 years, 20 years maximum, authenticity again is the value behind the ubiquitous diffusion of this neocraft economy and consumption that obviously goes, in between the folds of real world, for how much this term is clearly inappropriate, but we still use it for absence of alternatives, and the digital space, or in a post-digital kind of scenario, like the Geomedia Center would argue. So to analyze, this long-term kind of, authenticity in the longue durée, in a long-term perspective, we can start from here. When someone argued man was born free and he is everywhere in chains. I don't know, anyone wants to guess who was him? Studied at school, arguably, probably. We are with the good old Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I'm quoting only French here today. I don't know why. Typically, it's not that, but that's what's happening. No, in 1762, okay? So in the opening quote of the social contract, we have this idea. Man is born free, and he is everywhere in chains. And these kind of chains broke by society, by the starting industrialization process, because clearly there we are at the beginning of the industrialization process as what, prevent in this kind of vision that starts from the Romantic movement and then goes on in the centuries from reaching a sort of personal individual self-expression and thus authenticity. And we arrive to this other point, we arrive to this point that may well describe the contemporary city, in contemporary large cities, in contemporary metropolis, the metropolis makes tastes at once less uniform to the point where there are as many tastes as there are people. Taste has become individualized, and you can express your individuality, you express your individual personal taste. Who's arguing this? Maybe it could be from the last decade, maybe it could be... No, it's always Jean-Jacques Rousseau from 1762, actually. Okay, so we're still there. So we tend to see this kind of process as something, that is very recent, but actually this was already the impression of a man living in the second half of the 18th century. That the metropolis, the industrialization was becoming so pervasive that tastes were becoming unique. We could speak of cultural omnivorousness in the 18th century. Actually, these are from two different books. The first one is from The Social Contract. The second one is from Emile, which is also a good reminder if we ever feel very productive to remember that Jean-Jacques Rousseau published 2 books in the same year. I mean, woof. I mean, but that's another point. So the idea here, obviously, is this, to see this fundamental idea that goes through centuries. And here we have the ghost of Jean-Jacques Rousseau appearing on the background. An important point here is that from its inception, we must be careful, because Jean-Jacques Rousseau has been vastly depicted as this, weird guy who wants us to return to the state of savage in the forest and, and fleeing away from civilization, the state of nature, the savage man, etc. Actually, that's not true. What Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued is that, the object is not to make man a savage and relegate him to the depths of the woods. He clearly, explicitly, countered that image. The point is that enclosed in the social whirlpool of the modern metropolis, that for him obviously is Paris. He's referring to Paris here. He not let himself get carried away by either the opinions or the passions of man, blah, blah, blah. No. So the idea is to retaining your sense of self in the social whirlpool of the metropolis. And this opens a very interesting parallel, where we can read, historically speaking, how this kind of element, this kind of idea has returned. 1 century and a little bit after Jean-Jacques Rousseau, from the UK to the US to Japan, these movements named arts and craft developed that was arguing the idea of an ideal return to the art value, to the value of craft against industrialization. And again, in that case, William Morris, its most famous proponent, has been often depicted as this weirdo who wanted to abandon industrial production and go making everything by hand, etc. No, actually, that was an idea, that was a movement like back to the future in some way, that actually referred to an idealized past to actually envision post-industrial futures. And much the same can be said for the current neocraft economy. One of the first articles discussing the neocraft economy and the neocraft industries by Professor Chris Lan from Anglia Ruskin is precisely titled Back to the Future, to indicate this dialectic process for which the neocraft economy obviously appeals to the past, an idealized past made of authentic food, authentic social relations, but at the same time, envisions a post-industrial kind of society. So authenticity in the longue durée has to do with one's inner self and agency. It can't be defined, and it's aspirational. It's defined by its absence, and it's a highly polemical concept. It connects political with aesthetic judgment. And that's, and we understand now the clear link with consumption, because what is consumption if not the conjunction between aesthetic and political judgments in our everyday life. The point is, and I'm going very quickly here, the point is that from the Second World War onwards, to be hip, to be authentic, to display a sort of hipsterism has been first the key trait of almost all Western countercultures. The beats, the hips, again, here the picture behind are the original hipsters, which originally was an Afro-American subculture in the US of just after the Second World War, which were vindicated a distinctive style against the WASP society of the 40s. But then it became the basis of a new mainstream paradigm, of consumption that we can see today. Here we have, some, I will not go through them, but we see some iconic advertisements from the most different industrial fields, from food, fast food, to beverages, to Apple, to Nike, that from the 70s onwards embodied this idea of being authentic for a thing. Oh, sorry, here it remained, autenticità remain, or in Italian, probably the self-corrector of my PowerPoint. Apologies for that. But, so authenticity, we can consider it in the last 50 years, at the center of both, projects of commodification by late modern capitalism and dreams of liberation from industrial and capitalist alienation. That is the idea. I will not go a lot through here, but again, contextualized in here, we can see, and here we return to the good old Karl Marx, German now, not French, okay, who argued again already, in the 19th century that the bourgeois point of view has never advanced between this antithesis between, again, a bourgeois spirit of commodification, of industrial development and technological development, and a romantic viewpoint of escaping the alienation deriving from industrialization and technological development with an idealized return to nature. And therefore, the latter will accompany the bourgeois point of view up until, well, what for Karl Marx is its blessed end, and everyone can have their own opinion, but, this is the point. And here we arrive. What defines, what is at the basis of the proliferation of hipster economy in the urban field, sorry, here I'm using field, not in the Bourdieusian sense like John and Justus, but, in a more general meaning, is an aircraft imaginary of consumption, which has some specific dimension. Again, from a time perspective, it refers to an idealized past, but to prefigure a post-industrial or even post-capitalist in the most, radical formulations future. It has a specific space dimension. Again, it allows an ideal return to the rural environment, to the rural space and nature for people who are trapped in the urban space because of their lives, of their jobs, because we know we live in an increasingly urban society. And so we can't actually, to live in the countryside has become or a very specific life project, or it has become a sort of privilege in some sense in the current society. It's only for some categories of people. And it has also obviously a social dimension, accessing a cosmopolitan circle of people characterized by a similar symbolic capital and a valor and a value dimension. Obviously, what I want to quickly specify here is that I don't want, I'm to say that authenticity has become a new paradigm doesn't mean that, any other kind of aesthetic, any other kind of consumption distribution has disappeared or has become obsolete. That will be complete foolishness. Absolutely. It's a matter of how much this is central for a specific capitalist configuration. Obviously, we could speak, and here is, again, a French sociologist, apologist, a French sociologist, Baudrillard, who says, the industrial products also have a specific aesthetic, which we can term a kitsch or pop aesthetic. And the kitsch evidently revalues the rare and precious authentic object. And so the kitsch and the authentic object in their dialectical relationship organize the world of consumption. Why? Because obviously for something authentic to exist, for something to be authentic, it must necessarily have some benchmark which is inauthentic, some kitsch or industrial benchmark, to distinguish itself from, to act these kind of minute deviations or marginal distinctions forms. And so obviously this does not mean, this is just to reinforce that this does not mean that only authentic kind of consumption or only taste led by consumption exists. Absolutely not. And here we arrive to the impact of all of this on the urban space and with social media. Okay, here I'm very quickly taking the last minutes, to address For example, this case, why? Because obviously, as all academics, I also like to brag about myself. And this is object of an article on the BBC in which have been cited. So I can add to my bio, his work has been featured on the BBC and this kind of stuff. But apart from that, because it seems a pretty interesting case, and here we have the turtleneck. The turtleneck is the authentic artisanal dessert from Prague. If you now go to Prague, at every street, you'll have some shop selling you the authentic dessert of Prague, the turtleneck. What the issue is that the turtleneck is not from Prague, is not Czech even. It's originally from Romania, then it diffused in Hungary, then it also diffused in Slovakia, but it is not from Prague. And so this is one of the clearly, kind of paradoxes, or actually, of the tensions and the dialectics. Why? Because, well, obviously, social media had a fundamental role in, establishing, the turtleneck as a typical authentic dessert from Prague. Now you can find an enormous amount of posts with a turtleneck on TikTok or on Instagram. There has even been a political controversy in which the new US ambassador in the Czech Republic published a post saying, "Oh, I'm here with a new authentic dessert from Prague," and it created a scandal, and he had to apologize and to delete the post because obviously, if you're the new ambassador, you're required to know that actually this is not from Prague. But at the same time, and this is the provocation with which I'm, closing, we could argue in some way that the turtleneck is authentically of Prague in the terms in which, if we think to it, what is the turtleneck? A very simple kind of food that can be prepared very easily, and so that simply people from Prague that were looking for a job adopted in order to exploit the incredible and the vast now touristification of the city. What they had to sell, to sell a sandwich with a sausage wasn't as fancy. And so they did what working class people always did through history, finding something that could be sold to people and start promoting it as authentically local. And, arguing, and this is a quote from the article, where the journalist asks, "Is the turtleneck authentically from Prague?" They said, "Yes, for sure. It's traditional Czech street food, like the Czech pizza." And I want to say as an Italian that this may well cause basically a declaration of war if widespread in my country. But still understand the idea of authentic is also deeply marked by class relations and by the relationship between the digital and the physical space. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope to not have taken too much time, and very happy to answer to any kind of provocations and questions you may have.